The Dred Scott decision was handed down in 1857. The next year was an election year. In 1858, many became interested in a series of debates between two candidates vying for a Senate seat in Illinois. The candidates were Stephen Douglas and Abraham Lincoln. Stephen Douglas was a member of the Senate and had already earned a national reputation for himself. He was a strong supporter of westward expansion and a champion for popular sovereignty. He was also known for his support of the Compromise of 1850 and the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Lincoln was an Illinois lawyer with humble origins. He was also a one-term member of Congress who gained fame for his opposition to the Mexican War. Lincoln was a member of the brand new Republican Party, which began in the 1850s. There were a wide range of issues different Republicans supported, but one issue which united them was their opposition to the expansion of slavery into new areas. The highlight of the campaign came with a series of public debates between Lincoln and Douglas in which the two argued over national policies in the context of the Dred Scott decision. Douglas tried to portray Lincoln as an extremist on slavery, but Lincoln rejected abolitionism. At Freeport, Lincoln forced Douglas to admit that people living in the territories could effectively outlaw slavery by refusing to enforce laws in support of the institution. This was good enough for people living in Illinois, as Douglas won re-election, but it cost Douglas votes in the South when he ran for president in 1860. Even though Lincoln lost this election, the Lincoln-Douglas debates were important. As segments of their speeches were printed in Eastern papers, the nation read as the debates continued. It also demonstrated that Abraham Lincoln was a rising star in the Republican Party. If the Lincoln-Douglas debates caught the nation's attention intellectually, John Brown's raid in Harper's Ferry raised the specter of war to new levels. If you remember, John Brown was an abolitionist. He believed he was put on earth by God to rid the nation of the evils of slavery. This slide from earlier in the presentation outlines one of Brown's actions in Kansas. He and some supporters were responsible for the murder of the 5 pro-slavery advocates in the Pottawatomie Creek Massacre. In 1859, Brown developed a plan to capture a federal arsenal in Harper's Ferry, Virginia. He, along with a small group of supporters, hoped to then use the weapons to lead a slave insurrection in Virginia. The group successfully captured the arsenal in October of 1859, but there was no slave insurrection. The plan was doomed to fail from the start. It involved Brown and his 18 followers fighting against the United States government. Soon after they captured the building, it was surrounded by local militia. Brown was then arrested, put on trial for treason, and executed by December. For more information about Brown and his actions, you may click on the hyperlinks below. The actions of John Brown truly were significant. When Brown's correspondence with Northern abolitionists became known, many Southerners were shocked. Following his execution, Brown was treated like a martyr, rather than a traitor, in some Northern cities. This influenced some Southerners to believe that many in the North were abolitionists, determined to fight to free slaves. Some have called this the final straw which led to war. Some in the South began contemplating secession in 1860, but as events would unfold, no states would leave the Union until after the presidential election in that year. This political cartoon from the election of 1860 captures some of the chaos associated with the election. There were 4 candidates in the election, and each is portrayed in the image. The candidates appeared to be ripping the nation apart during this national election. The first of the 4 candidates was Stephen Douglas. He was a Northern Democrat and supported popular sovereignty as the solution as to whether slavery should expand into new territories. The Southern Democrat, as the party split in the election, was John Breckinridge, who supported the expansion of slavery into all new territory. Abraham Lincoln was the Republican nominee. He would allow slavery to remain where it already existed, but wanted to prohibit its expansion into new areas. Finally, John Bell looked for compromise. he ran on the Constitutional Union Party ticket. He supported the Union, the Constitution, and enforcement of laws. The results of this election were rather unique. Abraham Lincoln clearly won the election with 180 electoral votes, but his support was strictly in the northern states and far west, as he won only 39% of the popular vote. Breckinridge came in second, but his support was limited primarily to the states of the lower South. Following Lincoln's victory in the election, calls for secession grew even louder. New compromises were suggested, but not adopted. Even before Lincoln's inauguration, in December of 1861, the state of South Carolina voted to break its ties with the Union. It was followed by 6 additional states. This map identifies the secession of the southern states as they formed the Confederacy. The states shown in brown, from the Deep South, were the first to secede from the Union. A great deal of information has been explored in this presentation. However, there are a few final thoughts which can be considered. This lecture has focused primarily on American politics during the 1850s. By the end of the decade, political leaders were no longer able to reach a compromise solution to solve the crisis facing the nation. Maybe you could describe several important events included in this presentation and evaluate which you believe to be the most important factor leading several southern states to secede from the Union. With the secession of the 7 states of the Deep South, it was clear the American experiment in democracy had failed. However, the next presentation will show how the nation fought a civil war and eventually became reunited. This ends lecture number 14. The next few slides will have hyperlinks to more information and a list of sources used to create this presentation. Have a great day.